Welcome to Farm Your Daily, a Field Forward podcast. I'm your host, David Geiger. Today on Farm Your Daily, just how normal was harvest this year? We review fall 2025 with State Climatologist Justin Glisan, who says we saw an abnormally long growing season. Please be sure to like and follow the podcast as well as our social media at Field Forward Pod. We would love to have you join our community, keeping folks informed about what is affecting our farmers. This is Farm Your Daily. And joining us on Farm Your Daily, we're going to take a look at what has gone on this past fall, at least for weather. And to do so, we have with us Justin Glisan, State Climatologist for the Iowa Department of Agriculture. Justin, thank you so much for joining us again on Farm Your Daily. Always good to talk to you. And what is the review? What are we seeing here? What was fall typically like, and what was it this year?
Yep, great to be back with you, David. So looking at fall, I think one thing that really stood out was the length of the growing season. So when I talk about that, I'm talking about the first widespread frost and freeze event that we had across the state. We did have one station back on September 7th, Stanley, hit 32 degrees, but it wasn't really a widespread killing freeze until just about 10 or 11 days ago. I don't know the exact date off the top of my head, but we had
Basically, the start of November.
Yes. We had 2 nights of 28 degrees or below. And looking at stations across the state and looking at the gap between the last spring freeze and the first fall freeze, that gives you the window of the growing season. Many stations had the top 5 longest growing seasons on record, and that just tells you how deep into the season the frost and freeze event was. We've also been drier. September was the 25th driest, 25th warmest on record, but last September was also the driest on record. October, we had fits and starts of some cold air, warmer temperatures. Overall, about 6 degrees above average for October. And then we had a wet start to November, and that was a transition of air masses. That's where we had that cold air. We had a good shot of rainfall across western Iowa. But overall, we have seen drought conditions expand, particularly eastern Iowa, but also a pocket of northwest Iowa where we see D1 conditions. Overall, though, a generally quiet fall, good for our farmers, good to get harvested. We had excellent windows in which to harvest. Now with NASS being shut down, with the government shut down, we haven't seen those official numbers, but I'm pretty sure we're near finished.
Right, and hopefully we'll be getting those soon. We'll be able to analyze those a bit more. You did mention having such a long growing season as the first thing that you noticed there. Is that particularly significant? What does it mean to have a long growing season from a meteorology perspective?
Yeah, so meteorologically, it's just interesting that you have a length of warmth. So looking at the rankings this year, we'll have a warm year, and we've had a string of warm years, going back 60 months or 5 years. Some of the warmest stretches that we've seen in the observational record for average temperatures on an annual basis. But also with a long growing season, you have a buffer. We reached maturity for corn and beans well before climatologically the first frost or freeze. So that was one thing that farmers didn't have to worry about. Also, you think about the wettest July on record with a stretch of warmer temperatures and drier conditions through fall. We did use some of that surplus moisture that we got from a second wettest July on record. However, again, it gives us a little more flexibility in terms of harvest or, all these activities that we do in fall to get ready for winter and in fact, the next growing season.
You mentioned September was the driest on record for the state of Iowa. Am I recalling you saying that correctly?
2024 was the driest.
2024 was the driest. How did that compare to this year?
Yeah, 25th driest this year. So
25th driest. Okay.
Still dry with 153 years of records, but we're still working off those surpluses that we built up in July. So we do have parts of the state that are near average. A majority of the stations are below average, whether it's slightly below average, or if you look in eastern Iowa, you do have precipitation deficits going back to the beginning of the year on the order of 6 to 8 inches. So some substantial precipitation deficits out there, even with a wet July. But overall, where we are now versus where we were last year at this time, wide coverage of D1 and D2 conditions across the state. Some D1 across the state right now, but soil profiles are dry, but much better than last year. Let's hope we get some moisture in before we freeze up for winter.
I was noticing on the US Drought Monitor that we are also seeing some, I think it's D1 in the northwest and the southeast, maybe east central as well there. How has that come to develop over the last month or two?
Lack of rainfall, and it exacerbates those longer term precipitation deficits. Again, we're still, there's always a balancing act between when do you start to write off those longer term precipitation deficits from the 2020 through 2024 drought, the fifth driest 48 months on record. You think of aquifers, you bring this up a lot astutely. We have to think about these aquifers, these longer longevity hydrological indicators. It'll take 5, 10, 15 years to replenish the deficits that we took out of the aquifers during that during that 4-year drought. Stream flows have been lower. Soil moisture profiles coming into the season were also drier, but that was actually a silver lining with how wet we were late June and July. We could have seen widespread flooding if we had not come into the growing season dry. So when you're looking at these D1 areas in eastern Iowa and then parts of northwestern Iowa, you look at stations within that D1, those are drier stations. Those have seen longer term precipitation deficits out a year or two. So when you do get dry, those precipitation deficits reemerge, and that's where we see the drier pockets. So if you were to go back last year, or even as we were starting to come out of the drought, these would be the pockets of potentially D2 or even D3 going back into that 4-year drought.
Part of the reason why I brought that up is because you did mention November is starting out very wet. And October felt wet. It felt like there was a lot more rain than usual. How did those come into play with what we see on the drought monitor? Is it areas that were wet, like that central strip from southwest Iowa all the way to northeast Iowa?
Yes, absolutely. So the rainfall event that we had the last part of October into the 1st of November was basically in western Iowa, and you had at stations in western Iowa, west central Iowa, a quarter of a month's rainfall over 36 hours. So you also have to think about runoff. If you do have saturated soils, you're not ingesting a lot of that moisture that's falling. Luckily, we had drier soils, so we had good infiltration. But where you see a swath from southwestern up to north central Iowa of D0 free conditions, that's where we've seen rainfall. Also, with widespread rainfall across the state, we've held off on more rapid intensification of drought and expansion of drought. So I think we're sitting in a pretty good position. If we do stay dry through November, we will see additional D1 expansion, I believe. We can also see expansion in winter. A lot of people are thinking like, well, you can't have a drought in winter given how dry it is. It is the driest season, but you can see drought expansion in winter.
Let's talk about, you mentioned aquifers before I could. I like to talk, I think it's partly because I just like the word aquifer.
Yeah.
It comes off the tongue nicely. It feels good. But when it comes to aquifers and soil moisture, when you're going into winter, you have a certain amount of effect that has not only on the temperature, but also on the capacity to freeze. How is that looking this year?
Yeah, so what you're getting at astutely is that wetter soils will freeze slower and they won't freeze as deep. And the reverse of that, drier soil profiles, you'll have a deeper frost depth and they'll freeze up faster. So if you have a deeper frost depth, let's say in drier years through 2024, you had a frost depth of anywhere from 36 to 48 inches, very deep. So when you do get into summer or winter melt of snowpack on the ground, a lot of that runs off. It's not infiltrating deeper in because of that frost depth. Now, last year with a strong El Nino, we had the fourth least amount of snow on the ground for a winter time in 138 years. However, it was a warm winter. So the frost depth was basically below 12 inches. Now, if we move into winter with drier profiles, of course, there's the probability there of seeing a deeper frost depth. But that's why it's important to see some moisture. And if you look at those outlooks getting us into the third week of November, we are seeing a broadly lean towards wetter conditions. Now, again, November is one of the driest months of the year, so it doesn't take a lot to be above average. But overall, we would like to see as much moisture in the profiles to prevent a deeper frost depth.
All right, I'm going to take us on a quick tangent here because I like to learn things when I'm talking to experts. It seems like the opposite should take place when you have wetter soils. It feels like that should be what freezes faster. While with dry soils, you would just expect, there's not as much water there, so why would it even freeze? Why does it work the opposite than from what I would have expected it to be?
So you think of drier soils, more porosity in the soil profile. It allows that Arctic air or the cold air to infiltrate deeper. Water acts as a thermodynamic barrier, and you get into phase changes in the energy that's released or the energy that is absorbed, latent heat versus sensible heat. So that moisture in the profile acts as a blanket, as a thermodynamic barrier that prevents that colder air from freezing faster and deeper. It probably take 45 minutes to explain it, not robotically or as a nerd. So it acts as a blanket, and you think about a warmer atmosphere holds more water vapor. Similar behavior in the soil profiles.
From what I'm getting there, essentially water is just always present in the soil, and not only is there just more to, as you're saying, provide this blanket, but it also is probably moving more frequently, which makes it harder to freeze.
Sure, and you also get into again the energy transfer of phase changes from liquid, gas to solid. A semester in College of Thermodynamics.
I'm glad I didn't have to take that, but maybe I should have, because then I wouldn't be asking dumb questions. But let's take a look at expectations for the winter. What are some of these telekinetic patterns we're seeing here now starting winter?
Weak La Nina. We're currently in a weak La Nina condition, which for the listeners means colder sea surface temperatures in the eastern equatorial Pacific. So stronger trade winds develop. These trade winds in the Pacific Basin push warmer water further west in the basin. Warmer water further west in the basin produces more thunderstorms. So thunderstorms west, you have stable, large-scale, stable high-pressure system, basically south of the Gulf of Alaska. And this helps deviate the jet stream across the United States. So that jet stream dictates the storm track across the United States in winter. And given that large-scale, synoptic scale flow dictates the weather pattern in winter, we have a stronger correlation. So that's why we care about whether we have El Nino or La Nina. Now we have different teleconnections as well, Madden-Julian oscillation, the Arctic oscillation, which gives us cold air outbreaks in winter. And these weather patterns climate patterns work on a larger scale basis. So you can think of weeks for the Arctic oscillation, out decades for the Madden-Julian and the El Nino Southern oscillation. So boiling all that down, you look at analog years in which we've seen weak La Nina winters, and we have 3 data points recently, but going back to 2000, Generally, we see more snowfall in winter with weak La Ninas, 4 to 10 inches possible above average across the state. However, you have to balance that with the 30-year trend in snowfall, and that we've seen a dip in wintertime snowfall. As the fastest warming season, we're seeing more rainfall, more mixed precipitation events. But if we go back to the recent data points, 2021 through 2023, 3 La Nina winters, the triple dip La Nina. 2021 was the 12th snowiest. 2022, we had the 23rd least amount of snow. And then 2023, the 57th snowiest. So if you take, again, those analog years going back the last 30 to 40 years, historically, we should see more snow, but also end of January, early February, more cold air outbreaks, and that's where the snowfall potential is biased towards late winter.
You pretty much answered it, but I know there's been a lot of social media posts that have been sharing, I guess, more clickbaity items and topics where I've seen folks saying, you better prepare for a lot of snow this year. There's going to be so much snow if you live in this portion of the United States. There's a small amount of truth to that, but there's no guarantee that we're going to be super, super snowy.
A lot of that is clickbait. We're still a good deal out for the climate and forecast models to really peg the wintertime potential. So if you see anything on social media, you think about these snowstorms that are potentially coming through in the forecast, let's say over the last several years. A lot of those keyboard meteorologists take the extreme solutions out of the forecast models instead of the ensemble average, which takes in all the extremes and averages them together. So where you see the potential 3 days out of 48 inches of snow, it's an outlier. But again, people like those headlines, people like clicks on their posts. So I go by probabilities. I go by what the outlooks are showing from the Climate Prediction Center. And again, those analog years. Yes, if La Nina holds true to what it has historically, we should see more snow across the upper Midwest, but other factors come into play. So trust the probabilities. Don't trust the clickbait.
Justin Glisan, Dr. Justin Glisan, is the state climatologist over there at the Iowa Department of Agriculture. Justin, thank you so much for joining us on Farm Here Daily.
Always a pleasure, David.
This is Farm Here Daily, a Field Forward podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Again, in order to continue to produce this type of local content, we would love to have you join our community. So please follow the podcast as well as our social media channels at Field Forward Pod. You can also find me on social media at Geiger Reports. Again, I am your host, David Geiger, and I'll be back again on Monday. Have a good weekend, everybody.